Notre Dame football has made a game-changing adjustment to their recruitment, and we're going to talk about it next on the Portal Podcast.
Locked On presents The Portal, the daily podcast covering college football recruiting and everything NIL. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Welcome back into the Portal Podcast, where you get your daily recruiting, NIL, and transfer portal news. I am your host, Brian Smith, longtime recruiting analyst and college football writer. Thank you for making the Portal Podcast your first listen each and every day. And today's show is brought to you by the all-new 2025 Nissan Armada. Stay with us for the Armada Team of the Week later on in this episode. Today's episode is all about Notre Dame because they had their Pot of Gold Day on St. Patrick's Day yesterday, and I wanted to discuss all the offers they had, and more importantly, this is the key to the entire show, a game-changing trend for Notre Dame in recruiting. We're going to talk about how they have decided to go after the elite players from the outset, figure it out later in terms of all the fit and everything else, build relationships after the offer, and to help me do that, one and only Tyler Wojciak from Locked On Irish. Tyler, what's going on, my friend?
Not much, man. Just trying to catch up on all the Pot of Gold Day offers because it was a flurry on social media all day on St. Patrick's Day.
Yeah, I sent you that list, and I took the time to go through, and I'll mention a few of these here in a second, but like 20 offers just in California, 9 in the state of Texas, 7 in Florida, Georgia 6. They're attacking the elite states. They don't care about who else is offered. They don't care what high school they're from. Notre Dame is attacking this differently. And maybe the most intriguing thing, because we've talked about this many times on your show when I come on, Notre Dame offered a ton of defensive linemen. They didn't play around. They went after the elite guys, a lot of really big-bodied players, some of the Polynesian kids out west, some kids down in Mississippi, areas that Notre Dame doesn't always recruit. And I want to start there. I have followed Notre Dame recruiting and national recruiting for a long time, and it's very well known that Notre Dame is most often reactive in recruiting. They don't like the word change very much in South Bend, the admissions department, etc. Well, I don't know how all of it's going to work with admissions, and some of these offers may not end up being anything other than just now because they get the transcripts, they don't like it, whatever. But they're offering kids from schools that I know are not normal fits for Notre Dame, and they're making a concerted effort across the country. Like there's 3 offers in Mississippi, 4 in Alabama. They offered a Louisiana kid. These are players that they don't often go after, especially early, and make that offer. Did you see this coming? Because you and I had talked about they had to change, especially with D-line recruiting, but this is cross board. Did you see anything like this coming? Because I did not.
It was one of those things where I was hopeful because if not now, when? Like, when are you going to make any sort of headway with kids from this area other than after a trip to the national championship when Notre Dame was basically the biggest story in college football for a few weeks? Like, they had the first college football playoff game at home. They're in the center of the college football world. Like, all the spotlight was on them. Then they beat Georgia, who's been at the top of the sport for years. And then they knock off Penn State in a thrilling finish. And even though they came up short against Ohio State, they put up one hell of a fight. And throughout that whole time, Marcus Freeman, the leader of the program, and really the person who's changed recruiting at Notre Dame, is becoming one of the faces of college football. And it's a very coach-driven sport because players are usually in and out in 3 years or less. So you have a guy like Marcus Freeman taking center stage, getting all this attention, all this great news for Notre Dame. And it feels legitimate in a way where Notre Dame had good seasons in the past, but then they'd always fall short in the college football playoff. Well, now they're capitalizing on all of that momentum that the team had, and now they're doing it on the recruiting trail because for a lot of these kids, you know, they're class of 2027. They're really young. They have not seen a whole lot of success from Notre Dame on the biggest stage in their lifetime. Now Notre Dame has this run to the playoff. So they see Notre Dame do it on the field, and now Marcus Freeman is coming to them and saying, hey, we want you to be part of this. And I feel like the perception that Notre Dame has now on the heels of that run is just so different to these younger people who this might be their first exposure to Notre Dame. So I think that they're a little bit more willing to go in the South and try to get kids that otherwise, you know, probably wouldn't be interested in Notre Dame because they just had so much success. It's like now is the time to strike.
I agree with that. And to your point, I wrote down 4 players, and I haven't went through all the list because I don't even know how many offers they made in total, but it's a ton for the class of 2027. I wrote down 4 players, and one of them is a great point that you just made. they offered a player from Blessed Trinity just outside of Atlanta. Now, that is an academic fit for Notre Dame. It's a really good program. They had a certain linebacker from Notre Dame a couple of years ago, played middle linebacker from Georgia for the Irish. But traditionally, those kids are still going to go to Tennessee, Alabama, Georgia, Florida State, etc. And this kid's not just a good football player, he's a national recruit. And it's funny because not many kids really get the opportunity to make it to Notre Dame at any point. He gets this pot of gold offer. His name's DJ Jacobs, Blessed Trinity, 6'5", 220. Pass rushers have been something that usually Notre Dame struggles to recruit to. That's receivers the biggest bugaboo for them right now. But getting a kid like that on campus, like this is a player that Georgia covets. He's a national top 10 recruit. So your point about offering early and building a relationship, I think is huge. When was the last time you felt comfortable when I said national top 10 recruit, Notre Dame and Georgia? Like that, they just don't get those kids on campus early. They just don't. Even though a certain safety that now plays for the Ravens is from Atlanta. Like it's just hard to take. Georgia's got such a footprint anyway all over the country, but especially Atlanta. It's an hour away from Athens. What do you think about Notre Dame not only offering some of these kids, but getting there's some reports about kids taking visits, Texas, Georgia, Florida, California. Are you surprised by that? Or do you think that's a culmination of A, it's Notre Dame, and B, they're coming off, like you just said, a national championship game run?
I mean, I'm surprised that they got DJ Jacobs to commit to a visit so early on. I mean, he's going to be at Notre Dame on Saturday, according to some of the reports that are out there, and he's going to be with his brother too. So it's going to be a whole family thing. And, that trip to South Bend, it's not an easy place to get to. The South Bend airport is pretty small. So the fact that the whole family wants to go and really take Notre Dame up on this opportunity, to me, says a lot. I don't know if he's ever going to actually commit to Notre Dame. This is going to be one hell of a fight to try to get his commitment and then hold on to that, because right now he's listed as a top 5 player nationally on the 24/7 Sports Composite. And even in the case of Kyle Hamilton, a player who ended up being a really highly rated recruit, it wasn't like that when Notre Dame first started recruiting him. He was like a high 3-star, and then he moved up the ranks. So then by the time that he signed with Notre Dame, you're like, wow, what a get for Notre Dame. They got this stud from Atlanta. Well, this is a different case. Everyone already knows that DJ Jacobs is that good. He's from Georgia. So Notre Dame is going down there. And the fact that they're getting him on campus, I think is a big win. Obviously you need a lot more wins on the way to get this kid to commit and then ultimately sign. But anytime you can get the whole family to come to Notre Dame, I think that's huge too, because it's such a relationship driven program, culture, all of that. And I do think that the Notre Dame academic prestige, all of that stuff really applies to parents. Like they might appreciate that a little bit more than the actual prospects. So I think this is all a great sign for Notre Dame. And I think that this is just one example of a person and a player who might not have given Notre Dame that much attention before this past college football season. But now when you make it to the national championship and you beat the teams that they beat, all of a sudden everything changes.
Yeah, it's amazing. I mean, there's kids from all over the country. Again, the South, like Cameron Pritchett, defensive end from Alabaster Thompson. Thompson just won the state championship again. I live in Alabama, most prominent program in the state, but that's not a Notre Dame kind of feeder school. They just offered him. Dudley High School in North Carolina, Andrew Rogers. This is another kid. That's not a high school that fits Notre Dame. They offered Millbrook High School. They've got a kid named Rashad Streets, another defensive end. They offered him. So there's a major change of what Notre Dame's doing, trying to get in on these kids early. And then they've offered some kids in Mississippi, too, from random high schools there. These aren't private schools. So I think it's a good sign that they're at least trying to build relationships and go in a different direction, because they're probably 1 or 2 players away from consistently matching roster with what Ohio State did. Like Ohio State's D-line depth was one thing, but their starting 4, I thought, was as good, if not better, than anybody else's in the country last year, and they were healthier than Notre Dame, especially since Mills was out. But Notre Dame just didn't have enough pieces up front. Ohio State can offer those kids. Notre Dame doesn't always even try. So I'm curious about that. Before we move on, one last question before we go into the second break. Are you happy with how Notre Dame has transitioned? Now we're going to talk about a guy they just hired. I've learned just very little. I sent you some of the notes on that. Were you disappointed? Were you surprised by how quickly they've transitioned from Chad Bowden and all that?
I thought they certainly took their time. I think the way that things worked out with James Blanchard, the first general manager that they tried to get at Texas Tech, and the way that sort of dragged on. The longer that went on, the less confident I felt in him actually going to Notre Dame. So, that didn't go as planned. I'm really happy with the hire of Mike Martin. I don't know if it's going to work. It might work. It might not. It's really hard to say for anyone to look at a person who is making that transition from the NFL to college. I think there's a lot of pros to getting someone from the NFL, but it is a big transition. And I think the role itself is so new in college football. Like the general manager job at Notre Dame could be totally different than the general manager job at Ohio State or Miami, any of these schools. So I think they certainly took their time. And I think that's kind of how Marcus Freeman operates. I think he does his due diligence, but something that I've just noticed about him is that people want to work for him. I mean, look at Jaywan Sider. He had a great situation at Penn State, as arguably the best running back duo in all of college football, has worked for James Franklin for 7 years and decides it's time for him to uproot and go to South Bend, Indiana. So I think that there was a lot of interest, and he really looked at all these different candidates and made the right decision. I felt like the timing of it, this was always kind of the end date, right? They had to have the whole staff in place by Pot of Gold Day, because this has become such a fixture to Notre Dame recruiting. They like to get out ahead and reach out to these players early. So you think about the season ended late January. They had a little over a month and a half, almost 2 months to spare. So he took advantage of the time that he had and ultimately filled out the rest of the personnel staff. And now here they are on Pot of Gold Day, and they just released, all these updates. They brought Myron Tagovailoa-Amosa back to the program as well. So it feels like this was always the goal, to have everything set in stone by this date. And they got to this point without, that many major hiccups outside of the James Blanchard situation.
We're going to talk about the new recruiting guide for Notre Dame, and we're going to talk about a whole bunch of players coming up next here on the Portal Podcast. The Armada Team of the Week is brought to you by our friends at Nissan and the all-new 2025 Nissan Armada. Each week, our Locked On College basketball experts are picking one team that stands apart. From top-seeded stars to unexpected upsets, these guys showcase the strength and sheer power needed to push their team forward. This week's Armada and clear-cut Team of the Week would be the Florida Gators. The Gators, led by Walter Clayton, 17 points per game, dominated the SEC tournament, winning every game by at least 9 points. Not only did Florida grab the fourth number one seed, but they're the nation's most efficient offense. When it comes to the Nissan Armada, they say go forth and conquer, and that's exactly what the Florida Gators have done. It's clear that our Team of the Week is out ready to conquer the road ahead with confidence, just like you can in the all-new Nissan Armada or any of the Nissan's outstanding vehicles. Take the Nissan Armada, Rogue, or Pathfinder and go find your big adventure. Shop NissanUSA.com. This show is also brought to you by our friends over at Fabric. Life moves fast, especially when you have a family. One day you're watching your kids take their first steps, and before you know it, they're off to college. That's why securing their future is so important. Fabric by Gerber Life makes it simple to get term life insurance that fits your family's needs. With Fabric, you can apply for term life insurance online right from your couch. You could be covered in under 10 minutes, and in many cases, no health exam is needed. For peace of mind, a parent can get what they need for their family to make sure they're safe for the long term. Fabric gives you the opportunity to do that. Join the thousands of parents who trust Fabric to help protect their families. Apply today in minutes at meetfabric.com/lockedoncollege. That's meetfabric.com/lockedoncollege. Policies issued by Western Southern Assurance Life Assurance Company, not available in certain states. Prices subject to underwriting and health questions. Tyler, we also have somebody else that they just hired, and I've done the most bare bones amount of information. Just right before the podcast, I started looking into it. Jordan Blake comes over from Colorado, so he was on Deion Sanders' staff. He played in the state of Texas and is coached there in some capacity or been in the back office. So the Dallas area where Notre Dame is trying to get involved more, he'll be involved again. His name, once again, is Jordan Blake. John Blake, the head coach at Oklahoma at one point, played under Barry Switzer for the Sooners as a defensive lineman. That's his son. So there's certainly heritage in the Red River rivalry game. But he's been with SMU and TCU. And again, he's just recently at Colorado. This is the secondary piece. And I want to bring this up because you brought up Martin. The job at Notre Dame is a little different. Like I cover Florida State on the Locked On Podcast Network. Florida State can offer whoever they want, pretty much. Notre Dame has to attack things differently. This guy's coming from Colorado, which, it's a big state school. I imagine they could offer pretty much who they want. I'm curious how much Martin was involved with hiring him. How do you do that and all this? So we're still learning because there's no precedent for this stuff. But Notre Dame's recruiting coordinator spot, back office, on the field, whatever, it's different. Explain to anybody that may not be familiar with Notre Dame, like why it's such a different fit, both culturally as well as academically.
Well, the fact that he's really spent his entire football career in Texas before he took that job at Colorado, that's really interesting to me because we already talked about James Blanchard. He was a Texas guy through and through. That's one of the main reasons why he decided to stay. So it seems like a concerted effort by Notre Dame to establish some sort of foothold in Texas. And honestly, when they hired Chancey Stuckey to be the wide receivers coach, they made a ton of progress in that area. I mean, they got commitments from Jaden Greathouse and they got Braylon James. And even though it didn't work out for Braylon James, like it was a clear effort early on. And that was basically an untapped market for Notre Dame for the longest time. They've also got Kedron Young, Jadarian Price. There's a lot of good football that's being played in Texas. And I feel like maybe Notre Dame looks at some of those southern states and sees Texas as a potential option, like maybe a little bit more than Mississippi, Alabama, to establish a foothold there. And then maybe you could get some more players. I don't know how much that had to do with this, but I don't think it's a coincidence necessarily that they try to get Blanchard and now they got Blake from Texas. But to your point about this all being so new and Mike Martin kind of assembling a staff, even though some of the pieces were already in place, like Matt Jensen, the director of scouting, and then bringing in someone like a Myron Tagovailoa Amosa. It's good to have someone who played football for Notre Dame be a part of the recruiting and personnel department, because no one is going to understand the place and what it takes to not only get in the university, but then survive academically. But outside of that, it looks like they're really branching out and they're willing to, reach out to more kids from across the country that maybe they would not have been that actively pursuing earlier. So I think it's a good move, but it's also something where, they get someone like Jordan Blake, who might be considered an outsider, but then they bring in MTA to kind of balance things out. I think that's a smart move.
Yeah, you got to have balance with Notre Dame because as the offer list for Pot of Gold showed, it's coast to coast. They offered a running back in Massachusetts, but they also offered literally 20 different players in the state of California. And there's several in Florida, Georgia, et cetera. It's all over the United States. With that in mind, I have some questions for you. Let's have some fun with this. Florida State and Notre Dame and Texas and all these schools have their own little opportunities, but Notre Dame's is a little different. Do you feel Notre Dame is changing their strategy because of what's happened, especially at D-line, with all these offers early, or you think it's just coincidental?
I think it's very targeted. That many defensive line recruits, I think it was 16 at tackle alone. And then you have 12 more on the edge. I think that's a direct reflection of Notre Dame's current depth chart at defensive tackle. Like they're actually in a pretty good spot on the edge, so long as you guys like Jordan Botelho, Boubacar Traore, so long as they're healthy. Like I really like Josh Burnham and Bryce Young. So it's like they've done pretty well at that position, but on the interior, man, you and I have talked about this extensively. They just have missed so much at that position over the years. And that's why they had to go out and get a guy like Elijah Hughes from USC, who wasn't even a key rotational piece for the Trojans these past 2 seasons. They just need anyone in that room. And I think, the discussion around Al Washington is so interesting because I think he's done a good job at developing players, but the recruiting has just not been good enough at defensive tackles. So now maybe they're just thinking it's time to flood the zone and get a bunch of offers out and try to convince as many guys as possible. And they can maybe figure out the exact position later, but if they're big-bodied athletes who can move around and you think you can plug them into the middle of the defensive line, just like get them on board. If they're that talented, they're that physical, and they have that size, just get them on board early, figure out the position later, because I feel like there's been so many times where Notre Dame goes all in on guys like, let's say, Justin Scott, they get burned, and then they don't really have any quality backup options. Well, one way to alleviate that is to have infinite options, and it seems like that's their approach to defensive line now.
I agree. I think the defensive end recruiting is still important. You mentioned 16 tackles, 12 on the edge, and they're trying to get ahead on edge because if you've got pass rushers, you can change the game. So next question, and this, I've heard some different things. I'm just curious if you've heard anything on this. As far as Pot of Gold goes, no quarterback offers.
No quarterback offers.
None at all. Now, there's a couple of things I want to say before I ask you my question. Number one, they've recruited quarterback pretty well the last few years. That's obvious. Secondarily, you got to worry about with quarterback, because it's the face of your program, how do they handle media? Notre Dame's a different deal. I'm imagining they want to see most of the kids in spring, and more, if they can, they want to see them throw on camp. Like, how do you act at Notre Dame? You are a Notre Dame student, so I'll ask it this way. Do you think it is important for any quarterback that commits to Notre Dame, it doesn't matter what year it is, honestly, do you think it's important for them to at least be on campus and compete, be around the guys before they commit, because that position is different?
I think that's certainly part of it, being around Notre Dame and kind of understanding who they are as a person, because you think about it, like if they're in the class of 2027, they are so young, not just in terms of football, but just like as people. And I think, the way that Notre Dame has approached the quarterback position really ever since Marcus Freeman took over, they really find their guy and they go all in. And it is that player. And sometimes they've been burned. Like they went all in on Dante Moore and it didn't work out. They went all in on CJ Carr in the following year. That worked out perfectly. They got a commitment from him very early on. And then he stuck around despite the fact that Tommy Rees left. He held true to his commitment, ended up at Notre Dame, could potentially be the starting quarterback next season. Then they went all in on Deuce Knight. They had him committed for a really long time. Then they got burned. He flips to Auburn. They have Noah Grubbs very early on in the cycle. So I think that they're just taking their time. They're figuring out who do they want to go all in on. But something else that you have talked about before is they really value in-person evaluations. Like they can watch the film, they can see how they do in high school, but until they see them on campus competing in front of their eyes and going up against other quarterbacks, I think they put so much stock into that evaluation. They need some more time to make sure that they get everyone on board. And then I think they're going to find maybe 3 prospects and really recruit them super aggressively and hopefully learn from some of the mistakes they made with Dante Moore and Deuce Knight.
Yeah, it's very difficult at quarterback. Is if you miss there, man, things can go sideways in a hurry. When we come back, we're going to have some more questions for Tyler and finish up the show. Scaling your business requires the right expertise at the right time. With Upwork, you can find specialized freelancers in marketing, development, design, and more, experts ready to help you take your business to the next level. Upwork gives businesses flexibility by connecting them with top freelance talent across multiple industries, including IT, AI, web development, and marketing. Whether you need extra hands for a project or a long-term partner, Upwork makes hiring simple and affordable. Here's an example. I'm not the most patient guy, but if you put something on the job site really fast, really easily, it's free and simple, and then within a day, you're more than likely going to get a few qualified candidates to choose from. Visit Upwork.com right now and post your job for free. That's Upwork.com to connect with the top talent and grow your business today. Tyler, let's continue on with some questions and have some fun with this. This one is one of the more interesting ones, and you brought it up earlier. Jawan Sider. He is a unique recruiter. I told Zach Sako from Locked On Nittany Lions year and a half ago that I thought Jawan was the best recruiter in the country. And he surprised the heck out of me because when Notre Dame loses the running back coach, I'm like, yeah, you're probably not going to get somebody as good, but we'll see how it goes. They couldn't have done better with getting Sider in terms of recruiter. That's first. I already said I think he's the best recruiter in the country. Secondarily, the 2 Penn State running backs are recruited by him and developed by him. They're both probably going to get paid in the NFL. Do you think that Notre Dame offering several running backs in this pot of gold like they offered roughly 10 is surprising, not surprising, or do you just think Sider likes it that much and he's just that far ahead of the curve so he knows who he wants?
I was surprised by the number, especially when you compare it to wide receivers. Like typically there's only 1 running back on the field and there's, sometimes 3, usually 3 at Notre Dame, 3, maybe 2, but they offered nearly the same amount of wide receivers as they did running backs. And on one hand, I'm like a little bit concerned about the wide receiver recruiting anyway. So the fact that they aren't in on that many guys that early on is a little bit concerning, but I think that Sider is approaching it differently. I think he is such a dog recruiter. He has no problem recruiting 10 guys at a time. And I think he wants to create a situation where he evaluates a bunch of players, has a bunch of really talented prospects interested in the school. And then it's a matter of, hey, who commits first? Like, it's not going to be a situation where Sider is going to be, in November before the early signing period, trying to add 1 more running back to the class, as was the case for Notre Dame this past cycle. I think that he's going to get out ahead of it. He's going to really work hard and evaluate, who are the top let's say 5 guys that he really wants. And then I think he's just confident in his own ability that he's going to be able to get yeses from multiple of these guys. And then he'll just end up getting the best 2. That's probably right. 2, I think 3 running backs in a single class would be a lot. So, but if he gets the top 2, I mean, that would just be a huge testament to him. We're already seeing the early returns in the class of 2026. I mean, Javian Osborne is on campus literally as we speak. Most people thought he was going to end up committing to Michigan a couple weeks ago. Sider comes over to Notre Dame, and all of a sudden his recruitment feels like it's wide open. So if he's willing to attack recruiting this hard, this early on with the class of 2027, I think Notre Dame is going to sign another Jeremiah Love type player here in the near future, so long as Sider's the running backs coach.
Yeah, I think he's done a great job, and he's helped Penn State get into areas they didn't normally do, like Texas, and he's a South Florida guy. That helps too. At some point, he's going to help Notre Dame. By the way, they offered Jamar Thompson, a defensive tackle from West Boca High School that I saw this past weekend in a 5-on-5. That's another defensive tackle, and Jawan's got connections to that. So he's going to help out beyond the running back position. Do you think there's any surprises at all in any way, shape, or form about the 27 offers that we haven't already discussed?
We've kind of talked about it. We certainly talked about it before we started recording. The fact that Notre Dame offered 20 prospects from the state of California feels intentional, because when Chad Bowden went to USC, the thing that he made pretty loud and clear in his first press conference was that they were going to really prioritize the state of California. And it is a bit ironic, because I do remember when Lincoln Riley became the head coach for USC, he said in his introductory press conference, they were going to build the wall around the state of California. Like, that's what Pete Carroll did when USC was at its peak in his era. Then I don't know what happened with Riley, but he clearly shifted away from that approach to the point where a lot of people in California, like you have the coaches in the Trinity League at St. John Bosco and Mater Dei, basically openly saying Lincoln Riley doesn't come down here. And then he goes and hires Chad Bowden away from Notre Dame. And then Bone's like, no, that we're going back to this plan. And they've seen some really strong early returns. They got Trent Mosley to commit, a double Notre Dame legacy. They got Samote Ketuanga to commit to USC over Notre Dame. So then it felt like, is Notre Dame going to start shifting away from California now that one of their own basically is working in there? Not only working, he's leading their personnel department. Nope. They go out and they offer 20 California prospects, more than any other state on the Pot of Gold Day. And you and I alluded to it before. I don't know what happened with Chad Bowden and Marcus Freeman and the Notre Dame staff on the way out. It feels like there's some serious animosity there now, and it's great for the rivalry. And now I'm just so excited to see how this plays out in the recruiting trail, because 20 prospects in the state of California, who I'm sure USC is after a lot of the same guys, like that is going to be fun to watch over the course of these next couple of years.
Yeah, I agree with that wholeheartedly. So I'm going to be safe in assuming that you like Notre Dame's plan overall. I just want to mention a couple other guys that they offered. Richie Flanagan, they sent him an offer. He's from the state of Wisconsin. His father was from Wisconsin. Jim Flanagan was a national recruit, picked Notre Dame. He was on the cover after Florida State, got beat by Notre Dame in 93. He's probably as good a bet to end up in the Notre Dame class as anybody. So, and it's a defensive tackle, by the way, which is also nice. Jim was a hell of a defensive player, but he came to Notre Dame, ironically, as a linebacker that ended up moving inside. Also, I don't remember if I mentioned him, Braden Parks, Chicago Brother Rice, 300-pound defensive tackle, really athletic. Notre Dame has been very unlucky. That's considered to be their city because, I mean, it's an hour and a half away. There haven't been a lot of D linemen that were the big body types in the last 15, 20 years. This kid's 300 pounds and can move. And he's at Brother Rice. Look, just going to say it. If you're Notre Dame, you cannot miss on that kind of prospect. And then finally, another Catholic school. Lansdale, PA, Catholic high school. Terrence Smith, a left tackle prospect. Notre Dame's very involved. They always seem to battle a lot with them anyway, but Notre Dame, Penn State are two schools to watch. So Notre Dame does recruiting on the offensive line as well as anybody. So it's really an incredible list. And we'll talk about this more in a few weeks when I come on your show. I need to watch a lot of film because Notre Dame offered so many guys on Pot of Gold. It's just ridiculous. Tyler, any last thoughts on this entire endeavor?
I think just on the way out, thought it was really cool that Notre Dame offered Julius Jones Jr., the son of Julius Jones, one of the great running backs that he's kind of forgotten because the team was so bad around him when he was at Notre Dame in like the late 90s, early 2000s. One of my earliest memories of watching Notre Dame football was watching Julius Jones. And I went to the first game that I went to, I think he had like 3 touchdowns. So now that his son, who is a great prospect out of Florida, is getting offered makes me feel old personally. I don't know if his son is going to end up at Notre Dame because, with some kids, they want to follow in their parents' footsteps, and other kids, they want to do the exact opposite. They want to blaze their own trail. And I think that had something to do with Trent Mosley committing to USC instead of Notre Dame. But I don't know. That felt like a cool full circle moment. And considering they didn't offer any quarterbacks, at least not yet, on Pot of Gold Day, that was something that really stood out to me. And, like I said, I don't know if he's going to commit to Notre Dame, but it's cool to see that. And Notre Dame has done really well at getting the sons of former NFL players to commit. That's true. They also offered Jason Witten's son, Cooper Witten. So those are the type of prospects where I feel like Notre Dame is just in a very interesting boat with those guys compared to all the other guys that we've already talked about today.
Tyler, thank you very much. Tell everybody where they can find your work.
Locked On Irish every weekday. Spring practice is just starting up for Notre Dame, so I'll have a lot of coverage about spring practice, and I can't even believe that we're already talking about the 2025 season because it feels like 2024 just ended a couple weeks ago. But obviously a lot of recruiting stuff coming your way throughout the offseason, and transfer portal opening up again in just a few weeks, so that'll be really chaotic. So we'll have tons of stuff to talk about every day on Locked On Irish.
Same here on the portal, because I will obviously be covering the transfer portal a lot. We cover recruiting NIL and the transfer portal every single day here on Locked On the Portal. Thank you very much, everybody. Have a good one. I'll talk to you soon.